Hey, what's up, guys? How's it going? So, I'm going to teach you guys how to spot some different types of players in this game. Now, of course, everybody to anybody's probably already kind of got some idea of how I spot them, but if you didn't already know, what you do is you essentially, you're going to run into all kinds of players in this game. You're going to, I almost like to classify my people into traps, wall traps, your rally leads, your normal players that like to just kind of do an attack. You got your gatherers, then you got your banks, and then you got like your bot banks, and you got all these different types of people out there that play this game. But I can actually tell you a few ways that you can really learn like a great deal of information from just one person through this one menu. So first things first is obviously, might, obviously says a lot in this game. If you're 100 mil or higher, you're usually going to be a rally lead, or you're going to be a mid-tier fighter or a high-tier fighter, one of the two. All right, and a lot of the time, these same people are obviously usually going to be in warrior, usually going to have a gold hero, usually going to have a level 60 hero at this point. All right. But what ultimately says whether they fight on a regular basis is their kills. So if they've only got, anywhere from 10 to 100 mil, they probably don't do a whole lot of fighting. Now, granted, if it's 70 to 80 and it's getting close, then maybe, but even still, it's probably bare minimum. Now, when we look at the victories and losses, obviously, this says a lot. Obviously, if they lose a lot, then maybe they don't win, they don't know what they're doing when they send attacks or vice versa. But what we can make out of this is, how many times do they successfully defend? If they have tons and tons of successful defenses, there's a good chance that they're probably a wall trap. Now, when it comes to actual trap accounts and determining whether they're a trap or not, is, do they have a ton of troops healed? Because a lot of the time, if somebody gets like a fewer, of their kills, and yet their troop heals are like way up there, then most of the time that's because they are a trap account. And if you really want to know for sure whether they are or not, I'm sure you can scout them, and that's really a dead giveaway. But usually, if you can't scout them, this is just kind of a nice indicator to kind of get an idea of what kind of player you're up against. Now, when it comes to determining whether it's a rally lead or anything like that, a lot of the time these players are going to have a lot of enemies captured, and they're often going to have a lot of executions. They're going to have a lot of they're basically going to be the same people that are essentially having a lot of leaders in their prison, because 9 times out of 10 a rally lead is usually the same person that's probably got a boost or two popped already at this point. But that's usually an okay indicator. Obviously, you can determine a rally lead by looking at whether they've got a gold set of attack gear, and depending on what attack gear that is, whether it be inf, ranger, cav, or a mixture of the three. Now, of course, when you want to determine whether it's a bot bank or something akin to that, or even just a normal bank for that matter, the key component is, do they have a ton of resources sent? So usually, okay, a bank or a bot bank or anything akin to that, they have a ton of helps, and they also have a ton of food, stones, and timber. They basically send resources on a regular basis. And so these are usually the same people that are, they're basically transferring resources to the nearby enemy, friendlies, essentially, so that they can help during a war effort. But these can also be the people that are doing a ton of attacking and then taking the resources and dumping it on the bank. Some of the more smarter banks that I've seen out there, they don't really transfer any of the resources on there, and rather they let players attack them and steal it straight out, so that it's not a dead giveaway. But, for what it's worth, obviously, if you wanted to determine whether someone is online or not, you can check the help sent and remember the last 3 digits. And if you check it back in, say, 5 minutes and it hasn't changed, that's usually a good indicator that someone isn't online, because a lot of the time, especially in guilds that are fairly active, if there's a constant change in the helps, and that's a lot of the time people press it by habit, so it's usually a good indicator to determine whether someone's online. Obviously, when it comes to bot banks, a big thing is resource gathering, because almost every bot bank imaginable does a ton of resource gathering all the time. And I've seen a lot of players out there that do a ton of gathering themselves, but bot banks are just absolutely notorious for just having an enormously large resource gathering rate. in comparison to normal people. Now, it's not to say that you can't say for sure, but it is usually one of the few indicators that kind of it throws it away if it doesn't already with the name. But of course, when you are actually wanting to learn more and more about your players, one thing that you do need to understand is the gear in this game. Now, of course, you guys have probably all heard about the new gear set that just recently came out. And of course, if you want my honest opinion on this new set, it's complete garbo, and I wouldn't buy it if it were me, because I just think it's just, I just don't think it's worth the money, and I'm saying that because, to be honest with you, all right, by the time you get this thing to blue tier, you're only getting 4% and only 1.8% into training speed, which for most people is probably downright stupid to even buy into anyway, because you can get more out of heroes for a lot less money, I'm sure. But to add on to that, okay, the only reason I think anybody's going to take any interest in this gear set is for the production rates. And that's only for those of you out there that are trying to mass hyper into timber, or that's, 10 to 11%, which is probably another, couple 100,000 you're getting out of it. So if you're not somebody that's using this gear purely for hypering, I really wouldn't bother with this particular set that just recently came out. But that's just my 2 cents on that. Of course, you guys have probably all seen the Bolinas bargains pack, which for a $5 pack, that's really not bad value, seeing as how you get Brave Hearts, you get some energy, you get some Holy Stars and speeds, and and then you get a shiny surprise, which might yield something. This fortune chests I've had in the past I've yielded something on those from time to time. I'm never going to come anywhere near that pack or this pack. This pack I've had luck in the past with, and of course, Reach for the Stars is okay, but to be quite honest with you, if you really want Holy Stars and you want them quick, I almost recommend that you take the time and actually go through and you go into the familiars and you actually get Trickstar, because I've been getting about 10,000 or so from his Lucky Stars ability, which is a pretty ridiculously overpowered ability. So if you want to quit buying packs for Holy Stars, guys, that's really where it's at. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, as far as everything else is concerned with the new set, and even just dictating what kind of players you're up against, one of the things that I do want to talk about in this particular video is just really kind of strategy. I mean, a lot of the time, I think people out there have kind of, I think I've made tidbits of, well, this is how you do this and this is how you do that when it comes to attacking players. But now that I've kind of gave you a brief overview of how to at least determine what kind of player you're up against, one of the few things that I like to do out of habit is essentially, so like if, let's say I want to attack Blue Star, okay? He's 15 million might, and he's tiny, I know it is, and he's not in any war gear, because this is all research gear, and I can tell just by looking at that. To be quite honest with you, if you want to be able to get fairly decent at this game, you need to be able to point blank look at this and say, this is what this is. This is all, beginner starting gear. It's so tiny that I don't think I need to worry about it. It's so tiny and irrelevant that it's hard to care about. And that's the thing, when you deal with smaller players, it's a little bit more difficult to really, it really is. It's actually more difficult to determine. But then if, let's say, I go down to base and I pick somebody like Bam, who's 1.9, it's, immediately I can tell you just by looking at this gear, he's got infantry set up, and then he's got a little bit of cav. But that's it. I mean, for the most part, this guy is purely infantry, for the most part, in terms of his gear set. Now, interestingly enough, the leader that he's got is not exactly for that purpose, so I'm not entirely sure why. But even then, having that said, it's just, if you can point blank tell me that, this is all gold production, this is cav, this is, I mean, really, to be honest with you, if you could just point blank look at this and right away, exactly what you're going to counter with. And to be honest with you, when it actually comes to fighting in this game, all right, there are a couple of ways that you can actually size up somebody just from a scout. To be quite honest with you, there's a lot of information in a scout report that you can learn. Just, to give you an example, okay, 11 Sammer, who's got 10 million food, 3 million ore, stone, blah, 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 blah. Okay, you know right away how many resources he has. You know whether or not he's got his leader out. You can even tell, what kind of heroes he's got on that wall, which will tell you, is you got an infantry, a cav, a range, and a range, and a range. You know, you can tell just by looking at that he's using mostly range heroes, but they're not even decent range heroes because they're not all the way maxed anyway. And having that said, when you actually look at what he's got for defenders, it's weird when you can find that somebody's got more guards and more cav but less range. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but just based on that, I know that, you know, and again, if you want to actually determine might loss, right, one of the few things that you can do is you can actually click on here and then click on the unit type or tier, and it's 24. Okay, so take 24 times 118,000, then you've essentially answered your own question on how much might that guy has. And you can deduct that, and you can actually get a good idea what his core might is. But, you know, of course, if you want to determine, you know, okay, well, just from looking at a target, how much could he potentially have for healing space? We'll just take the total number of infirmaries this guy has. So it looks to me like he's got 4, so that's 160,000. And at 160,000 out of 118, it's all going to go into the infirmary. All right. And of course, if you wanted to determine how big of a resource cost that's going to be, it's the same thing. You can actually figure that out as well. It's actually surprisingly easy. But, you know, again, the little things like this is, you know, all from a scout report. Now, of course, you know, pretty recently I actually had a, well, I don't know, you know, it amazes me how, like, somebody like this, who's 725 million byte, from a scout report, you could determine whether somebody's a wall trap or not just by scouting them. Because it'll tell you the wall HP, it can tell you so much. But very seldom do people even pay attention to it these days. And it's honestly, it's something you could avoid having happen to yourself. So, like, this guy, he lost his buffer, he paid a fairly decent resource cost with little to no expense, you know, other than some traps. I mean, to be honest with you, we're you know, obviously, just by looking at this, I can tell you that he's using mainly core army attack heroes in this particular lineup. And even still, he's got mostly infantry, and he's packing a pretty okay amount of drakes behind it with some cannoneers, and then just a little bit of frontal protection. Because again, when he attacked, he was probably an infantry phalanx, right? And so he put 20k as a 20% buffer, which, mind you, is like the basically the mathematically most sensible option whenever you send an attack on somebody. Is you want to send about 20% of whatever the heck you're going to send, and it has to be the lineup of whatever you're going to attack with. So if you're going to send cav, you need to have 20k of whatever you're going to use to bounce or buffer whatever you end up attacking with. But needless to say, you know, it's just, I hope some of the advice that I have and what I've told you thus far is kind of helpful in determining, you know, what kind of targets you are up against, and just the little things that will really ultimately make your game play a lot better. Of course, in my opinion, whenever you send in an attack on somebody, always send a 2-unit type setup. So where this guy, in my opinion, messed up is he sent 3 unit types, and to be honest with you, you're probably more effective in sending just 2. And where he could have really, you know, gotten some value out of this is actually put, you know, out of 5 heroes, use 3 heroes to your 1 main focus, and the remaining 2 to the other second focus in terms of 2 unit types. Your gear needs to reflect that, and so does your heroes. All right. Now, you know, in this particular lineup, you're probably thinking, well, what is this lineup for? Because that does not apply. Well, that's defense, and when you do defense rules are a little different. So whenever you're in defense, you're going to want to essentially, when you pick up the actual wall heroes, all right, one of the things that I recommend doing is you need to basically depend on 1 or 2 particular unit types. A lot of the time we all start off in infantry phalanx when the wall breaks down anyway. So a lot of the time what I do is I will actually pick a bunch of infantry heroes on the wall, because by the time that wall drops, a lot of the time, in my case anyway, I have a lot of infantry stats, and so I bulk up all my infantry attack and everything. But for what it's worth, all right, the mindset here is I'm trying to buff up the traps. So because, you know, essentially what I'm in is a wall trap setup. So I'm basically building up traps and then bulking them up in return, which works really well. Now, obviously, you know, if you want to know what the stats are and all of this, it's basically you've got to have about 400 to 500% wall defense. That's about the magic ballpark. You know, 500% is perfect, 400% is better, but you know, 500% is a pretty safe place. And then your trap attack and stuff, the higher the better, because that's just going to increase the amount of damage that you're able to do. But anyway, needless to say, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. This is just some general advice in terms of attacking and defending. And, well, needless to say, I'll catch you guys later. See you guys next time.